What a great session with such great speakers. The transformational AI adoption in the U.S. Navy, a fireside chat with the U.S. Navy and Domino Data Lab. We have with us Randal Cole, who is Chief Data and AI Officer of the U.S. Department of Navy OCIO, and Nick Elprin, Chief Executive Officer of Domino Data Lab. Everyone, please give them a warm round of applause.
Hey everyone, good morning, and thanks for joining us. I'm Nick. I'm the CEO of a company called Domino. I started the company about 10 years ago, and we've spent the last decade building what I believe is the best platform in the world right now to enable large organizations to build and operate AI at scale, in particular in what we consider to be mission-critical use cases. And I feel incredibly privileged to be enabling and supporting our customers who are doing work across industries to really, I think, not just help their companies, but help the world in general. We work with 10 of the largest 20 pharmaceutical companies in the world, helping them bring new life-saving therapies to market. We work with regulatory agencies and some of the largest financial services organizations in the world to help keep the economy safe and healthy. FINRA is a customer of ours. Some of the largest banks in the world do all their systemic credit risk modeling in our platform to help keep the economy safe. And I'm particularly proud of the work we're doing with the public sector and the federal government work across a number of agencies, including the Federal Reserve, the CDC, the GAO. But one of the ones that I am most proud of, and thanks for bearing with me through my introduction here, is the work we're doing in the Department of Defense. And I'm so honored to be able to speak with and introduce Dr. Randal Cole at the Navy. Randal, can you tell us a little bit about your role and how you got to where you are? And then I'm excited to get into some use cases.
Sure. Thank you very much, Nick. Appreciate the opportunity to talk. And I'll say before I start my background, I see a few folks who have helped to mentor me along the way as part of the Department of Defense, and I think of Michael and Eileen. Thank you for all you've done. My career, as they knew it, started out in the Marine Corps on the civilian side as ops research analyst there. Spent a lot of time doing analysis across the board, many different types of business and other readiness and operational analysis. So that translated into the realization that it was really hard to do that work without good data. And so that translated into the fact that the Marine Corps recognized they needed help on the data front, which became my role to really lead discussions from the Marine Corps to the Department of Defense, again, partnering with other military departments and services. That, after a period of maybe a couple of years, then translated into a role under Mr. Tom Sasela, who was our first Chief Data Officer within the Department of the Navy. And he brought me on board as his deputy. 4+ years later, here I am as Chief Data and AI Officer acting in the department. And I'll just be really clear because I know it says U.S. Navy. Department of the Navy in this sense is the overarching secretariat level function, which covers both Navy and Marine Corps. So that's why I'll talk about both a little bit today.
It's fantastic. All right, well, I want to talk about some use cases. There is a ton of hype around AI right now. And from what I understand, the Navy is one of the organizations that's really putting some of this technology into practice to drive really exciting outcomes. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about sort of what have been some of your biggest successes with AI to date, and also as you look ahead, what are the opportunities you're most excited about? And one thing I'd ask is, when I say AI, I'm not narrowly referring to Gen AI. I think that's one of the things that's gotten lost in the industry conversation we're having right now is the conflation of Gen AI and AI more broadly. So would love to hear about your success stories and opportunities you're most excited about when you think about the full spectrum from sort of traditional data science through predictive machine learning and now including Gen AI.
Okay, so yeah, I've got several things. Your questions, as we talked last week in prep, really made me think. And so I spent significant time last night walking through what I thought were some very interesting and a bit of a breadth of the use cases we have. And I think, from my perspective, a lot of those are being driven bottoms up. which is great because I think those folks are the closest to the problems, really understand what they need and how they need it to insert in their day-to-day operations. I think as we talk about use cases, I want to do a little preface here. Really love the last panel's emphasis on the requirements is what I would call them, the mission need, the understanding of the question. If you don't have that right, it is going to be really challenging to be successful. Sure, you can do great things, you can have people engineer things, and they can have some fun-looking technology, but is it going to actually address the problem? Probably not without a really clear understanding of what that problem is. And I think the enabling of the technological maturity and the resource investments that go along with these various use cases is also critical. I'll just bring that up. Again, we talked about acquisition in the last panel, and I think that is a major challenge that continues to be there for the great ideas that work. Domino Data Labs has provided us several good examples of that I think we'll talk about here shortly. How do we actually move those forward into production and out to the fleet in our instance? So people aren't typically that excited from our program executive offices and program managers to just throw things into the cycle decision loop of combat systems. A little bit challenging. They're very hesitant to just go forward with that approach. So how do we move that forward in a way that's meaningful? And I think we are developing an approach in coordination with our Chief Technology Officer that allows us to have sort of a large funnel, a large filter of these pilot projects that are underway, bring those to a level of maturity where we say, okay, we can either fail this fast or we can move it forward. No, this is not uncommon in industry, or the way you do business or used to doing business, not as common in the federal government. But this is something that we've started to structure, and we're getting on the order of hundreds of these pilots that are starting to come into our queue. Finding resources for those, similar in a business sense, go out and find your venture capital, do what you need to do to be able to allow those to mature. That process is starting, and I would say within the last 6 to 8 months within the Department of the Navy. And I am steering the pilots that I'm hearing from when I get in discussions with vendors, have people come to me with good ideas. We funnel it into that pilot process so that we can have a collective view of what the use cases are. I'll get to the use cases here shortly. So example use cases, and from my perspective, there are a lot. There are hundreds of these across the Department of the Navy. And I think the ones that stood out to me when I'm thinking through it last night, text analytics, natural language processing, machine learning to help parse and curate some of our message traffic. Any of you who have been in Department of Defense, Department of the Navy know that naval message traffic is a thing, and it's where, frankly, a lot of business gets done. So you want to call for or particular action from one ship to another. You want to have a commander say, this is my intent, here's what I want you to do. You want to have people actually act on that. A lot of that goes through naval message traffic. That is not your standard structured, really nice looking data set. Those typically come in these all caps message formats, and it's ugly, and they're not consistent. There's not really a strong standard. We have a Project Hermes that is within our Naval Enterprise Data and Analytics platform that has stood up in the last 2 years and really matured to the point of millions of messages being sucked in, being able to be parsed, and be able to collect the data out of those for further use.
See why you're asking about the small models presentation earlier. It makes a lot of sense.
I'll throw out, because I know I want to leave time for others. I'll say, let me skip down here. So another fleet side use case, really ready for deployment at this point, to my understanding, on the Marine Corps side, is our use of natural language processing, large language models, to take the lessons learned that are coming out of the fleet, out of operations, and be able to search those and be able to pull out key information and prepare that for changes in our operational tactics, safety impacting there, and in a positive sense, learn what not to do. That is a particular project, again, initiative that I think we're pretty proud of. Let me turn it back over so I don't.
Yeah, well, maybe if I could prompt you to talk about one more that I have some familiarity with, because it's where we've been working with you. Could you talk a bit about Project Ammo?
So I will not be the best to go in depth as we've talked about on Friday, but I will talk to you about the things that I've seen so far. I haven't personally got to see this in action, but certainly have been briefed by Captain Hasse and others out of our PM shops who are really working on what I would call edge-level, solid application of AI machine learning models to avoid going into sensitive settings here, to recognize things and be able to recognize those in difficult environments. So the particular work that Domino Data Labs, I think, is enabling us to do is super impactful to the fleet. This is real time. This is forward-leaning, operational, at the edge, understanding of whether we're seeing the right things or not. And if we're not seeing those right things, how do we retrain the models to make sure that we do pick those up? This is life and death impacting, as you can imagine. And the teams working with Project Ammo, Domino Data Labs, deployed part of major DoD initiatives. If you're familiar with something called the GUIDE series of experiments, global information dominance experiments being led out of our CDAO at this time, and in combination and collaboration with our combatant command. So there is a tremendous amount of influence in what I'm seeing from Project Ammo, because it is forcing us to think through how do we want to train and use models at the edge, how do we want to move the data that's at the edge back to potentially larger training capabilities, retrain, and then push that back out. I'll say in general, we have parts of that solved. I think we have a really strong model that could scale to the rest of the Department of the Navy. And frankly, this is always the thing that the Department of Navy, and I know other military departments have this issue as well, but we always talk about the denied, degraded, intermittent, latent environment where you just can't get comms, or you're down for a while and you're back up and you're down, or you can't signal because it's a danger to you and your units. So this particular use case hits at the hard problems, and I think it, from my understanding and what I've seen, phenomenal job to this point.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit, and I won't share anything that isn't public. So this has all been reported. But to expand on that a little bit, some of the success that I know we've seen working with your team is for the particular use case of models for doing mine detection that have been deployed at the edge, like you said, in unmanned underwater vehicles. Some of what we've seen is an outcome space. I think what we've heard reported is a 50% reduction in the time and human effort involved in detecting some of these mines, which is that's huge. And then on the technology side and sort of the enabling infrastructure side, the way that platforms like Domino and some of the other technologies you're using have contributed to that are a reduction in what we talk about as the iteration cycle time. So how fast can you go from, we've got this version of the model deployed, we've now learned a bunch more we've gotten new data, we've learned more about the successes and the successes and the failure rates of the model at the edge. Let's take that data back, let's retrain, do another iteration of the model, get that pushed back out. We've taken that iteration cycle time down from about 6 months to about a week. And so you just imagine the compounding gains of every incremental model improvement you can drive if you're now doing those iteration cycles over a week instead of 6 months.
And I might have to plead a little bit of ignorance here, but I think another huge issue that you guys are addressing at some level is the fact that, hypothetically, you can imagine if you're on a ship and you're out there in the ocean, there's a lot of blue water and flat horizons, and there's a lot of video-related data that you might capture that's basically useless for what you're trying to do to train the models. Using AI/ML to be able to quickly sift through that and narrow down the amount of data that's critical to the model training that needs to be pushed is a huge factor.
You touched on the importance of sort of starting with the problem, and some of the previous discussions we've heard have reiterated that point I think it was Seth who said, if someone comes in and says, help me do AI, the first question's got to be, well, for what? Talk a little bit about the sort of strategic drivers that you're using to prioritize these different use cases. You talked about the funnel of hundreds of POCs you have. Is it how much are you balancing kind of operational efficiency? How much are you prioritizing particular warfighting related missions to the extent you can talk about those? I mean, what are at the top of your value pyramid? what is driving your prioritization of AI use cases?
Great question, and I'm going to answer it in, I think, a positive way. I'll say that sitting in the Pentagon, you're often bombarded with the Pentagon business and just the business of being in the Department of Defense. Clearly, there are a huge number of opportunities for efficiency there to drive that, better productivity in the way that we manage our policies, create job announcements, you name it, go across the board. That, because it has been somewhat of an easy button to talk about in the Gen AI large language model sphere, has been the focus of initial discussion. But about 4 to 5 months ago when I took over the role, intentionally made a shift, at least from my perspective. Not always a welcome shift. For those of you who have been in the Pentagon, understand the reception you typically get when you start talking to the fleet about how they're doing operations and you want to inject yourself in a positive way. Often they're like, shut up and go back to the Pentagon, leave us alone, give us the money, let us do the work. But we intentionally made that shift, and I really wanted to sort of force the discussion. In so doing, we have highlighted and I think prioritized the projects like Project Ammo and a lot of other really key edge-related use cases for both Navy and the Marine Corps. And I honestly think we've found enough rogue actors who wear uniform and or just disruptive innovators that we've got some positive momentum. I will not tell you what the reactions have been across the board because I'm going to keep this positive. But I will say that with that, we have been able to begin to bring forward and highlight a lot of the great work that's been underway in our task forces within the Department of the Navy. And that has really, Project Ammo being a part of that as well, that has really shown some light on the possibilities and really where the fleet's head is in this work. So our prioritization starts with the edge and the warfighter. Yeah. Quickly, we have to address other things, but I think that's the top of the pyramid.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to extract some wisdom from you to leave the audience here with some actionable and concrete advice. So when you think about what has helped most increase the maturity and impact and effectiveness of these AI initiatives, especially as you've scaled. I mean, a pipeline of 100 POCs is substantial. What are some of the things you look back on as critical to increasing the maturity and the success and the impact? And to give you maybe a suggested framework, maybe think about advice across people, process, and technology.
No, great stuff. This is the part I thought the most about last night.
Okay. Glad we finally got here. Sorry.
Something practical.
Yeah.
And I think it's safe to say all of you have lived this. There's no magic bullet. There's no easy way to do this. It takes a lot of engagement with people. I really love the conversation. It's about getting in with the people, taking the time, doing the work. That is not something that is typically on job descriptions and job announcements as to go at it. This is going to be a really hard job and you're going to have to deal with a lot of people you don't want to deal with, but that's how you're going to have to get this done. Again, it's just reality. And I think from the practical side, we focused on ways to improve successes. And you're going to notice when I go through my list here that there's not really a lot that's technical in nature.
Except Domino, of course.
Except Domino, yes. To me, I guess it's more about enabling the great work going on the technical side to be able to succeed. We are not typically the experts sitting in the building, but certainly we want to enable you to do what needs to be done. And I think one of those starts with, and I'm going to go back again, hitting on mission need, defining the problem, identifying the question. People are going to say, yes, we do that. Yes, we spend time doing that. And you probably do. I would say probably you need to spend more time doing that in some cases. So if you feel like you do a good job of that, that's great. I would say that being able to move forward in a way where you sit down with the senior leaders and you want to get the information or the questions from them firsthand as often as you can. In our case, whether that's a 3-star, a 4-star, a senior executive, you want to talk to those folks directly. but you can't assume that what they're telling you is what's really needed. You can't assume that they're able to accurately describe that. You have to be able to take a look at what they're asking, be able to frame that, be able to start your initial work, and then go back quickly and iterate on that. You may not have direct access to them, but I think you have to have some way of providing feedback quickly.
For what it's worth, I'd say the same exact thing applies in the private sector.
Perfect. I think one of the challenges, some of the pitfalls, going straight to the data, getting a big data request out there without actually understanding what the data is needed for. Mike, I know you've lived this problem, and that is a common thing, especially with the analysts. When analysts go out, I'll say this because I'm one of them, the question from the system owners, the data managers is, how much data do you need? And we say, all of it. I want to see it all. And that probably is not tenable for the most part. But, in some cases that's necessary, but for the most part, you need to understand the problem, what you're trying to do, get that target to source mapping down, and be able to ask for the right data. Doing a literature review. Don't fall into the pitfall of not understanding what else is already out there. Again, it is basic research methodology here.
Yeah.
Get it. And we all think we do it, but I'd say our teams are
I've seen so much time lost to reinventing the wheel. It's really staggering. And that the impact of that, it grows, quadratic, non-linearly as you scale your organization, because now you got 12 different teams all duplicating work, and the research debt or the organizational debt gets really unwieldy.
Yeah, and you probably know this as well as I. There are organizations that have tried to do a good job at broad content management, like DTIC. That is only a fraction of the real knowledge base that's out there, and most of that is not managed very well, frankly, across the board.
And I would add that AI or machine learning or even classical data science introduces a different set of challenges and complexities to be able to preserve and manage that institutional knowledge. So it's not merely, I searched the wiki and I found some notes about someone did. Well, now you want to go dig into that, or you want to go start from that past work. You want to go recreate it, reproduce it. Even traditional software engineering systems don't really work for this, because let's say you get the code, it's all in your Git repository or whatever. But if you're talking about a data science project, it's not just the code that you need. You need the data, you need the definition of the software packages versions that you had installed. So we've seen a lot of organizations waste a lot of time in aggregate by not being able to discover, reuse, and reproduce past data science work.
No, 100%. And one of the things very practically that we've done, I hope all these are generally practical, but one of the things that we've established as part of our data and analytics enterprise platform is a use case governance process. The last thing an analyst wants to hear, but we have it. And we have it in the form of submitting use cases with a solid description, capturing that metadata about those use cases, and being able to pull that forward for my deputy to be able to assess and govern. So there is these are hundreds, like almost 500 now probably, use cases. And we are able, with that additional information, to start to pull together the commonality so that we're not repeating work, and really give ourselves an opportunity to succeed and focus on the right things. So I'll say, so that was number one. That was a lengthy one.
Okay.
So the key one, and I won't take this long on this one because I think it was hit really well by our last panel in many ways. But I think we have an opportunity within CIO, where I sit, to partner with our Chief Technology Officer, our Chief Information Security Officer, and others. And AI, it's not an isolated thing. It's going to take the infrastructure. It's going to take the security components. It's going to take process understanding. It's going to take a lot to be able to make it successful at scale. And so our partnerships with those people, in the form of making sure that we are collectively engaged in communicating the use cases as they come forward, that we invite each other's staff that actually gets the work done to the meetings in a collective manner and collaborative manner, that has been huge. That's how we have glommed onto the pilot process. I said, you know what? This may not be a perfect process, but right now we're going to force it to be used, and I'm going to find out how good it's going to work, and what needs to change will change. And so I've directed our folks on the CDAO side to go with the CTO's process. This is the way we're going to do business. So making those partnerships are huge.
I love that, and I'm struck yet again by how many of the the real levers to pull to drive this kind of impact are fundamentally people and process and cultural related. I want to leave a couple minutes to talk about governance and responsible AI, because that's been a hot topic today. But before I do that, I want to share one thing that some of your comments reminded me of. We've talked a lot about, both here and in the earlier discussions today, about the importance of starting with the problem. You mentioned the sort of failure mode of starting with the data. I want to share two metaphors I've heard that capture this, and they may be useful to take back to your organizations. One is the idea of working through your problem right to left instead of left to right, and left to right being we've got this data, what do we do with it? Right to left being what's the goal? What are we trying to achieve? Let's work backwards from there to what is the opportunity to apply AI and data science or ML, and from there, what's the data we need to make that use case work? So I think that this sort of flip the directionality of the line was a helpful metaphor that I've heard. And then I heard someone take this to the next level, and actually a CDAO I've worked in the past who I really respect. She turned me onto this concept of the value graph. And this is how she worked with the C-suite at some of her organizations to drive a lot more impact from AI. Is she first started by bringing everyone into alignment around what is the most important strategic priority for the business. Then from there, you work backwards to, well, what are the key metrics that we want to move? And then from there, you work to, well, what are our differentiated assets and sort of biggest levers to pull to try to move those metrics? And then you get into, well, how can AI help, and what are the use cases? And then finally, you get to the data. So hopefully that some of those I'm a visual person, so those visual concepts of help your organization build the value graph. But in any case, start at the top or start on the right and work backwards. I found those helpful. Okay, so I think we got a couple minutes left. I do want to talk a bit about responsible AI and governance. It's top of mind for everybody here. I think I'm particularly interested in your opinion about it because, in the warfighting use cases, I got to imagine that often you and we collectively are up against enemies who likely do not care as much about responsibility and ethical AI, right? Whether they're authoritarian regimes or whether they're non-nation state actors. How do you strike a balance between being responsible but not slowing down innovation when life and death is at stake?
So, I think our approach is going to be able to be prepared for what we need to be prepared for if the enemy does or does not play by the rules. I think our projects generally are not, the ones I'm familiar with, let me say that, are generally not the aggressive Terminator type, that's going to find something and go out and do things autonomously. However, as you read the news and as you read what's out there, there are a lot of autonomous actors that are being built by other nations and also by ourselves. So I think that gets back to, again, what I wanted to discuss on, and Domino supported us as well on edge-related capabilities. How do we scale AI to the point where we can use it effectively at the edge, not have such a huge compute burden, but also ensure that those can't be corrupted as easily. So long discussions last week with some of the folks in CMU, SEI that are thinking through a lot of these issues. How do we ensure these models are not corruptible or are less corruptible at the edge? What does that look like as it scales back to what we would call an operations center, so between the edge and the Pentagon, and then ultimately back to our major commands in the Pentagon? How do we address that at each layer? To me, that's part of being responsible. Also, the hardest question, again, I think that we hit early on, which is if the enemy doesn't play by the rules, they're taking our lives with whatever AI they're employing. We have to be able to combat that. That is unfortunately forcing our hand at some level. So I think we have to be realistic and be prepared for both, and govern very carefully as much as we can the development and use of those things. So I hope that's enough of an answer. to be helpful.
Maybe last question, and then I don't know if we'll have time for any questions from the audience. As you think about the next, maybe couple year horizons, or let's say 2 to 3 years, what do you think is the biggest lever that you can drive within your organization, or that you would want help with from the private sector to drive the next step change in the impact of AI?
I will say my communicated biggest gap right now, and I'll take it from the data side, so that's what you'll hear from at this point. The data side is being able to tag and frankly model our data in a way that it's integrable and able to be leveraged across multiple use cases. We are in large part doing that work brute force right now, which is not desirable, but it is the way that we've had to start based on the people who were willing to come forward and the capabilities we had. I would love to be able to expedite that work. There are many data models I know that exist in industry that are probably 80% solutions, at least on the business side, to what we do. We have challenges, and the reason I bring up Department of the Navy and Marine Corps, just simple person. How do you define a person? What attributes go with that person? Navy, Marine Corps don't necessarily call it the same thing. Civilian doesn't necessarily call it the same thing. How did we bring that together? It took us about a year to do that.
It's always the data.
It is. It's painful.
Well, back to where we started this morning, and why CDAOs are make such a good fit for the CAIO role.
Thank you. Please give them a warm round of applause. And we're going to give you just a 10-minute break because we have executives on the next panel who will be needing to head back after they speak. So let's take a 10-minute break and come back. There's refreshments outside. Thank you, everybody.